Yeah, brilliant talk. Thank you very much. Just interested because obviously rewilding doesn't mean no management, does it? It means a different type of management. So you therefore do need long-term funding. How is the private sector engaging, and do you need very big projects for the private sector to engage?
So yeah, rewilding mean reduce management, which does in urban settings, it's very unlikely that it would be no management for sure. So there is money that will need to be focused on. But even if we don't think about the management aspect, the engagement and the monitoring will require money. So yeah, very much so. For the moment, so what I know, which might not be the best person to talk about how is the business engaging with rewilding, but from what I know, it's not going with it that much, because there is still some lack and confusion around what it is and how it would fit with something like the biodiversity net gain, for example. So I think it requires a bit more tailoring. That said, I think that there is that a number of people are seeing it as an interesting and appealing opportunity. So my guess is that this is a very fast-moving field.
Thank you very much. Pete, you're on mute.
Pete, you're still on mute.
Thank you, Tom. Julianne had a question about how rewilding would work in smaller towns and cities. Julianne, would you like to ask that question?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Pete. Just want to say fantastic talk, Nathalie. Thank you so much. I found it really interesting because I know in North Wales, we tend to have we hear about these fantastic models in such grander populated places, but up here we can be quite isolated in terms of, urban towns. They're quite pocketed aside from the coastal belt. And most of our focus goes into the National Park in Snowdonia and onto the coastal parks as well. I was just wondering, is there examples of smaller scale urban rewilding that that I could also discuss with the conservation team and bring up this argument of it, because it can be, when I bring these kind of models up, they kind of go, well, that's great, but we're not in London, are we? So it just tends to get dismissed. Is it possible without digressing focus from the national park, maybe creating kind of links between urban and rural environments?
Yeah, so we talked about London because I think London is quite an interesting one because of the high biodiversity richness, the trends of vegetated area, the huge size, etc. But I also talked, for example, about that German example, and that is a very relatively small city, rural, urban spaces that was very much an industrial space. And what happened is that the rewilding project that we were talking about was a whole area that used to be used for mining, I think, or something like this, and then got abandoned, and they rewilded that. So you don't need to have that. So the setup for a big area where you're thinking about those vegetated garden and that connected can be equally thought about, or maybe higher, bigger area, not huge, but bigger, that you rewild because it was degraded. The point is always to look for things that are degraded and that could eventually support wildlife in a non-managed way. And so there are examples outside London. So I wouldn't say, and actually really those German examples would work very well, I'm guessing, for some of the things that you're thinking about.
Great. And just to add, I don't know, well, I know up here we have this issue with land ownership. Not everybody is so willing to give up their land or give permission for works to happen. Is that just something that we can improve with, with greater communication, great engagement of the area, and just, I don't know, it's just something I face a lot in my role, is a disagreement, and people have fantastic spaces and they're not willing to give us permission to do any engagement works on it. So with the private sector particularly. So how would you engage the private sector aside from funding, instead of saying we have this amount of money, how would you do that other than bring financials involved? That'll be something I know I would struggle in the grand scheme of things up here.
So I think you can't force anyone. So to start with, you need to accept that this is going to be, you're going to always have a variety of opinion. I think it might be interesting to, so I very much believe in tailored approach. So instead of focusing broadly, get one or two that you think might be, and then dive into what they are really after, or what they are interested in, and what the stuff. And what's interesting with things such as rewilding is that there's a bunch of benefits. And so if they have issues, whether it's from, so for example, there's been some companies that have been engaging with rewilding because they wanted to make a difference for the mental health of their employee, and providing them space where they could serve. And there's some really strong research on nature and health. Some others had problem with trying to find a cost-effective way to manage water flows, or so if you start to dive, then you get a better chance of engaging them. The problem is the blunt approach rarely works because people have different priorities and different personalities. Now, I know that doesn't help you, but my experience is that getting to know people and work closely, it takes time, basically. And some are more open than others. But in the context of rapid climate change and declining health, including mental health, and a loss of functioning ecosystem, which puts a lot of pressure on various businesses, yeah, I think there is scope for finding a way if you have the time to give it to, and I think that's the key.
Yeah, so just kind of the consistency of funding, to have people like me in post as well. I mean, that's something that's something to consider as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I wonder if I can turn to Penny Griffith before I come back to Rachel and then on to Tom.
Yeah, hi. Really interesting presentation. Thank you very much. So in Swansea, I'm with Swansea Council, and in Swansea we've got a really strong focus on green infrastructure and nature-based solutions in our urban spaces to try and improve. As you said, our principles are exactly the same as the principles you were in your presentation about climate resilience, climate adaptation, bringing more biodiversity into the city centre, etc. I was just wondering what your feelings were between the relationship between nature-based solutions or green infrastructure systems like roof garden and green roofs, green walls, SUD systems, and rewilding, because obviously there's a certain amount of engineering required in the SUD solutions side of things. For me, I think they can work very well together, but I was just wondering what you thought.
So for a start, rewilding is a nature-based solution. So that's a straight, easy answer. The garden roof, etc., they're actually going on in London already. So they absolutely can work together. The problem is not the engineering that you need to start with. As I was trying to explain, rewilding, sometimes you have to do a lot of things there. So, they straighten back, they de-straighten a river. That was a lot of engineering. That's still rewilding. What's important is how much you manage that after that. So in the case of green roof, I think the differences that you need to think about is that once your green roof is there, are you managing what kind of species get established and how they develop? Or are you putting a lot of effort and electricity and water and all kind of infrastructure to maintain something that you think should be ideal? That's where the difference is. The first one is rewilding, and that's happening in London. You just create space for colonization and you let it go. And actually what we see in some of the roof in London is that you suddenly get pollinators, species you didn't expect. They even got some kind of orchids on top of a roof that nobody knows how it got there. So you don't manage it, you create, or you get minimum management, but you don't force the system to go into one way. You don't plant stuff, you don't put water and stuff, etc. If there's a drought, there's a drought, and they're going to have to more or less get through this. And the other type of garden roof, where basically it's it's a show for people to choose the beautiful plants they really like to go together, and then put a lot of water into it, use a lot sometimes of electricity and energy, and actually it's a greenhouse gas emission project that I think might not be working so well. So I think, but that is really showing the movement from an aesthetic point of view to a functional point of view, and that needs to be addressed when we're talking about those urban infrastructure that actually sometimes are more driven by aesthetic than by consideration around greenhouse gas and climate change and nature. Does it make sense?
It does, yeah, and it sounds very similar to sort of our ethos around it. I think for me, it's also really massively about the cultural change and changing people's opinions on values is unfair, but their expectations around what urban planting looks like, and you know, moving away from the capability brown approach to urban planting, and seeing it more as, you know, seeing the beauty in the naturalness. I think for me that is a big thing as well. So the engagement's really important, and sort of that cultural shift we need to make, I think, as a population, to understanding why we're doing what we're doing.
I absolutely agree. It's this whole idea of stop talking about weeds all the time. Those things that we like, the things that we don't like. Yes, there's a massive cultural shift that needs to happen. So I absolutely agree with that.
Well, thank you so much. Rachel, you asked a couple of questions and they both seem to have been preempted by the responses to the previous ones.
They do, it's true, but like, can I improvise a third one now? Which is around, I think we might be opening up, if we're talking about perception of weeds, you know, in Ceredigion here, we're in the process of investing a lot of money in a big machine in order to change the way that we manage verges to improve habitat for pollinators. It'll probably save money in the long term as well, but we've got a big problem with managing public perception of that. So, and we've got a big problem with a chronic lack of sustainable funding as well. So I don't know how we're going to go about doing that, kind of bringing about that attitude change, because sometimes attitudes and beliefs, you know, particularly around the wild, it's quite a scary concept, isn't it? It's really hard to do that. So are there any good examples of that I could learn from about how to manage public perception and bring about attitude changes and cultural shifts, I think was the term I just heard used.
Well, so there's a whole field of this, which is called conservation psychology. So it would be difficult to summarize all of it, but there are a number of examples. It's some of the big key messages is that it's highly variable, it's culturally dependent, it's long term, and it's a regular engagement that shifts things, as well as the impact of what your neighbors does and how things spreads, etc. So anyway, there's a huge literature around that. I think one of them that I would spend more time talking about is really how we talk about nature and how we engage with people, because sometimes a lot of information is not passed on. So, for example, when we talk about the weeds, there's very few people that know that some of those plants that people are frantically removing from their garden because they have heard that message that it might kill a horse, which they will never have a horse, let alone enough of them to actually kill the horse. They remember that message and they haven't heard all the other message, such as that plant supports something like 50 to 70 different species, such as that plant that actually support. And you can switch that quite easily by reinforcing some stuff. So the way people remember information that shocked them, especially something around death and risk, they will also remember stuff that they see in their garden that they value because it's in their garden. And so as soon as you start to link both, then you have an entry point for talking. And so I'm thinking about what's the name of that plant and the caterpillar that people love, the cinnabar moth, and that we have in the UK that use that weed, which I can't remember the name in English right now. It's a yellow plant that people are completely worried about.
Ragwort.
rackwort. But very few people know that rackwort supports 70+ species, very few people. And as soon as you start to tell them that that's lovely cinnabar moss that they really love, it's in their garden, actually eat that, there's a switch that starts to happen, because you have something to balance against the death risk. And so I think that needs to happen more. We don't talk enough about, and that comes back to the point about the visibility of urban nature. We don't talk that much about all those plants. I mean, who does talk about ragwort in their stuff? You know, it's talk about zebra, lion stuff, etc. But those little species that are every day, there's very little communication and therefore little understanding of how. The number of people that don't know what they have in their garden always fascinates me. If you go into social media and they take plants and they say, this is a weed, what is it? Oh, I don't know. Well, in fact, this is a weed that, that can support elephant moss. And as soon as you say that, that becomes the iconic plant in the garden that nobody will touch. So I think there is a lot to do around that, around changing the narrative and just talking to people about the relationship between what they see, what they like, and how they come together.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Tom's had his hand up, virtual hand up, for most of this session. So I'm going to come back to him. But it's very close to 11 o'clock when I said we'd finish. So Tom, a quick question, if you would.
Well, I'll try and be very concise. It's following on really from initially Julianne's question around how we can get that engagement. And I've put some links in the chat for the Map of Dreams, which is over in East Anglia. And if you look at the map, it was a project that was very much designed in that local area. But because of the publicity it got and people really bought into the concept of it, when you open the map, you can see that actually people have committed land to that project as far away as Plymouth, up in Snowdonia National Park, Cheshire, all over England and Wales. And that wasn't an active part of that. So maybe just finding the right subject, the right, what's that phrase? There's no idea more powerful than an idea whose time has come. I think this is an idea whose time has really come. And I think people want to be able to step in and engage with it. And maybe it doesn't always have to be done from a top down. Maybe just sort of opening it up. So yeah, I'd encourage people to have a look at that. Following on from Rachel's question about how you get communities to sort of buy in and change attitudes, anyone who's looking at verges and wildflower meadows and is struggling with that, I'd suggest you have a chat with the team at Denbighshire County Council, because they certainly still have some struggles, but I think they've been doing it for a while now and have figured a bunch of that stuff out.
I have, but it's time I had another chat with them. So thanks for the reminder. Yeah.
Okay.
And before we all go, I'm not sure that the chat will be recorded along with this on YouTube. So please cut and paste anything from the chat, those links that Tom's put in there. And I know other people have been posting links. So please take the time now before we end the meeting to cut and paste those links from the chat onto your clipboard so you can save them for later. And I did promise that we'd let Nathalie get back to her really important work at 11 o'clock. So I'd like to say once again, a huge thanks. It's been tremendously interesting, and it's really helped me to think more about rewilding as a journey rather than a destination. So thank you so much for that. And thanks to everybody for attending and for participating so wholeheartedly in the discussion. Thanks again. And bye for now, everyone.